Let's talk about the objective function of the k-means clustering problem. The first is f of s and c. So this is the objective function for k-means clustering, and it measures the total sum of the square distances from each point in the set S to its nearest cluster center. And S represents the set of n data points that we're trying to cluster, and C denotes the sequences of cluster center C of 1, C of 2, ellipses until C of k. Well, k is the number of clusters that we're trying to find, and delta of x and C of j. So this represents the squared Euclidean distance between a point x and a class center C of j. This square distance is used because we're trying to emphasize this larger discrepancy, and it is computationally easier due to the absence of the square root calculation. And how about the mean function? For each point x, the distance to the nearest cluster center C of j is chosen, which can minimizing the distance across all centers. The objective of k-means clustering is to find a set of k cluster centers that minimize this object function. This means that the algorithms aims to place the centers in such a way that the total sum of the square distances from each point to its nearest center is small as possible. The result of k-means clustering is a partition of the dataset into k clusters, where each point belongs to the cluster within the nearest mean, which minimizes the within cluster variance. So this mathematical formulation provides a clear and computational goal for k-means algorithm, which making it one of the most widely used clustering techniques for segmenting data into distinct groups based on their attributes. Let's look at the second line, which is also the key component of the k-means clustering algorithm. So this equation calculates the total sum of the square distances between each point x and its assigned cluster center C of L. So the variable k represents the number of clusters, and L represents an index running from 1 to k, which indicating a specific cluster, and S of L represents the set of all points assigned to cluster L, and pointer x represents a point in a set S, and C of L represents the center of cluster L, and the delta of x and C of L typically represent the square Euclidean distance between a point x and the cluster center, which is C of L of its cluster. Let's try to explain the factorization. So the factorization into two sums is logical and straightforward. The first is the outer sum, which is the sum from L is equal to 1 to L is equal to k, which illustrates over each cluster. And the second is the inner sum, which is x belongs to S of L, which accumulates the square distances for all points that belong to the L's cluster. With partitioning of the set S into the cluster S of 1, S of 2, ellipses until S of k, which is determined by the nearest center rule, and each point x is assigned to the cluster S of L, for which distance delta of x and C of L is the smallest among all distance among to the other cluster centers. In conclusion, this double summation reflects the process of minimizing within cluster variance, which is equivalent to minimizing the inertia or within cluster sum of squares. So this factorization helps us in understanding how this algorithm optimizes clustering by minimizing the square distances individually for each cluster, which leading to a potentially optimal partition of the dataset. So this method ensures that the clusters formed are as tight as possible, which reducing the overall spread of the points within each cluster, which is the primary goal of the k-means clustering algorithm. The assignment step assigns each point to the nearest center according to the nearest center rule, and the update step recalculate each cluster center CFL as the mean of all points assigned to that cluster. So this is the optimization goal of k-means, which is to find the positions of the centers C of L that minimize the total sum of the square distances.